All right, fantastic. So welcome everybody to the second annual Boise State college counseling webinar. This is a resource that we try to provide for you guys, especially as you're rising seniors going into a lot of very critical decisions as you go about your application process. And we brought in a number of the staff members who you may have seen this last year as you were statesmen, who have a number of resources that we can provide you. So let me just talk about some logistics and then we'll make introductions. If you haven't already, you should be hearing the audio. If not, you can dial in this extension. There are long distance charges, so make sure that your phone is able to do that. And then if everybody except for Daren, Travis, and I could mute their phone and make sure their phone is on mute so you don't interrupt, we'll talk about there is a quick way that you can write in questions that we can all participate and see, and we'll talk about how to do that in just a second. But now that I think we have everybody, it sounds like everybody's on mute. Travis and Daren, you guys are not on mute, is that correct?
Yep, we're here.
Okay,
that's correct.
So I'll just, super. All right, well, let's get started with some of these logistics, and then we'll get into the content. So the first thing is, in case you're interested in submitting questions, which we highly encourage you to do along the way, there's a little button at the Join Me session at the top on the left that has a little chat box. That's where you start the icon, and if you're interested in submitting it to where everybody can see it, you can just leave the setting at all and just type in a question, and we'll all see it. And as Travis, Daren, and I read it, we'll find the appropriate time either at the very end or throughout the session to address some of those questions you have. If you want to direct it specifically at myself, Daren, or Travis, just write in at Austin, at Daren, at Travis, which we should, if we've all registered that way, that's how it should go straight to us. Okay? So here's a test message if you guys haven't already started to see this. I'm not sure you can see it on my screen, but there's already a few things going in there. Okay. All right, great. Well then, now that logistics out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to talk about some general things, and we'll do introductions. So why you, why now, why us? And as many of you guys know that are already seniors in your fall semester, you've been selected for this resource because you are now part of the Boise State family. And that extends to some of you that may come back and help join our family as staff members and serve future statesmen. But also extends to the extensive alumni network that you'll see. And hopefully as you guys go to college, if you haven't already back at your high schools, you'll start to see these t-shirts around and you'll know that you have this incredible experience, that you have commonality with these other young leaders from all different parts of the country, if not from Texas Boise State, but other Boise States as well. We're doing this now because we tried to move it up from last year. We did this, I think, in mid-November, but we wanted to try to get this in front of you guys as far as possible. For those of you who haven't already, this is definitely the time you need to be thinking about college applications if for some reason you've been pushing that off. Being the ambitious young leaders that got you to Boise State that you are, you likely have already considered a lot of these things, so we may be able to help with either logistics or a general strategy or a difficult question you're facing, or maybe just provide a different perspective on things that you've already had a lot of other perspectives on. And let's talk about now why us and why we feel like hopefully our experience and backgrounds can benefit you guys. So we'll start at the top, and I'll let Daren introduce himself, and then Travis, and then I'll do my own introduction as well.
Okay. So my name is Daren Brabham, and I'm a professor at the University of Southern California in the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. I teach public relations courses and new media studies courses, and I got my PhD in communication from the University of Utah in 2010, and I did a bachelor's degree at Trinity University in San Antonio and graduated there in 2004. Originally from the Houston area, and I've been with Boise State for about 15 years.
15 years. So Daren can provide a wealth of experience as a college professor who's seen the, I think, whole gamut from bad to good students, but also has done some incredible work that, in terms of just putting up resources free for students, like how to ask for a letter of recommendation, stuff that you might actually accidentally just run into if you search that on Google. Travis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Travis Arriaga. Currently, I work at Coastal Bend College, a small community college in Beeville, Texas, where I work in the as a student success coordinator. Basically, I do a lot of academic interventions and things with students, and I'm also an adjunct instructor. I have a background in admissions. I did for about 3-4 years, and financial aid in 4 years as well. I have my Master's of Liberal Arts in Mass Communications from Oklahoma City University that I earned in 2009, and my Bachelor of Arts in History from Schreiner University in Kerrville in 2005.
Great, and I just want to emphasize Travis has such an extensive academic resources background that I had to take some of it off of it, but as he mentioned, if you missed it, he's experienced as a financial aid counselor as well, and so he'll be talking about that specific topic a little bit later, and I know that's a big concern for a lot of you guys. And my name is Asim Saeed. You may have seen me around this last year as in an administrative role as the Dean of Junior Counselors. I work in a technology startup right now. That's why I apologize. My internet's a little bit shaky because we had some meetings down in Austin, so I've been driving on the road quite a bit today. Prior to that, immediately, I was a consultant, and then throughout my academic career, I spent quite a bit of time working with the Princeton Review, and actually find myself again in my spare time now volunteering with the Fort Worth ISD, trying to get involved doing more of these college seminars to help some schools that have, I think, limited resources. Academically, my background, it was oddly enough in medicine and then public policy, which Boise State actually really was the inspiration for. I ended up going into medical school directly after undergrad, but then all of the political things that I had kind of been seeded by Boise State came back to fruition when I decided to pursue a joint degree in public administration at Harvard. Before that, though, I'm from the Southeast Houston area. I went to Rice for undergrad, and Daren has already pointed out this. Often, I am very biased towards Rice University, so I'll make that disclaimer that when I interject things here that are about Rice, I will very much try to make that an example of a school like Rice, and I don't mean to encourage it, although in many ways I do like to encourage Rice because I'm a very big fan of that school as an alma mater. So that's my disclaimer, but I apologize for that in advance if it comes up. All right, so I think we're going to be kicking off with Daren. So this is a little bit of a schedule of what we're going to try to achieve. Last year, I think we finished pretty close to on time, and then we had questions coming in throughout at the end. But again, you guys are welcome to start putting in questions as we get to those topics, especially as they're fresh in mind. We'll try to track that chat and see if we can answer those live if it's the appropriate time. But if not, we'll do an open Q&A about any questions, concerns that we can help you guys with. So very much give us detailed questions, and then we might also be telling you. I find myself saying this a lot to students that it's not to be a rebuttal to your approach, but I will challenge you if I think you're asking the wrong question. Like I've had a lot of students ask me like, what I seem to be like somewhat odd questions like, which would you rather have, a higher GPA or a higher class rank? And that to me is like not the right question because it's rarely a trade-off that you're choosing one or the other. And my answer to any question about how well you should perform is always going to be as best you can. You never want to leave anything on the table. So if any deficits you have, you'll have to make up for. But at the same time, if you can do better, you should always do better. So I'll warn you in advance that you might get some answers like that you hear from your parents as well. So we'll kick it off. Choosing a school, application timeline, financial aid, and I might have to pop back into this to see who's covering what, but we'll get kicked off with Daren, our resident professor, on how to choose a school and some dimensions you might consider.
Okay, great. Thanks, Asim. So what I want to talk about, I think, is about making your view of colleges a little bit more complex than it might be currently. If you grow up in Texas, you learn to love or hate UT or A&M, and it kind of becomes all you seem to know about college in a way, or through big sports teams, or perhaps what schools around the corner from you, or maybe what your parents or your friends have attended in the past. And while that's a really great way to start, it's also important to think about some of the other ones that exist in the state and around the country. And Texas is really blessed with a number of great schools that represent a wide range of experiences. So we'll probably highlight a lot of those, especially with out-of-state tuition as high as it is. It doesn't make a ton of sense to leave the state if you're going to go to a public school, but it's really all about fit. And so let's dive right in. So one thing to consider is what kind of experience you want to have on campus. If you go to a small school versus a large school, a lot of the small schools tend to either be regionally focused or they tend to be more of the private liberal arts tradition. And some of the large big-name schools like UT Austin or Texas A&M, for instance, or even University of Houston, they tend to be wildly different experiences depending on how you pursue it. At a small college, everyone's gonna know you. I ended up going to a really large high school in Texas, in Houston, called Jersey Village High School, and ended up going to a smaller college in San Antonio at Trinity. And so that was an interesting change of pace. I really got to know my classmates very well, and also lots of opportunities to get involved in extracurricular activities. When you have a school that has a full sports program, non-scholarship, but a full sports program, and all sorts of Greek life and various activities and clubs, you can pretty easily wear a lot of hats because there's not a lot of you to go around. So there's not a ton of competition for the thing. And so, for instance, I walked onto the track team and threw javelin, having never done that, and that was a really fulfilling experience. Can't really do that at UT quite as easily. They definitely recruit for their schools. Another thing about a small school is you're going to get access to equipment and resources, perhaps a little bit easier and a little bit sooner than you might at a larger school, although that's not always the case. For instance, if you're interested in physics or astronomy and you go to a small school that has a telescope on the roof of the physics building, you might actually get to use that telescope for class projects as early as freshman or sophomore year, whereas at a large school like UT Austin, they might have a few more telescopes, but they have thousands of more students, and so you might not get to touch the telescope until you're a senior or even a grad student, if ever, and that's just a matter of resources compared to numbers. Considering rural versus urban, that's a lifestyle choice. You might want to go to a really urban school like an NYU, or maybe a University of Houston has an urban setting versus a much more rural setting. And would encourage you to kind of shake it up. If you've grown up in a rural area, consider going to a city school just to kind of broaden your horizons. Whether it's close or far, this is important. If your family wants to visit you or you want to visit your family for holidays, definitely something to consider in terms of expense. If you want to go home for Thanksgiving and you've only got 2 or 3 days to do it, you'll need to consider whether you can really afford or take the time off to take a big flight from across the country to get home. A broad or specific focus. Some schools are intentionally broad around the liberal arts and sampling different subjects. Some have much more specific areas of strength. So, for instance, Sam Houston State is really renowned in criminal justice. University of North Texas is known for music, and so on. So if you want to go for one of those specific reasons, those would be the schools to choose. Whether it's a local name or a national name, if you want to have renowned name recognition in the state versus nationally, you're going to get kind of different versions there with UT Austin or UT Arlington versus UT Dallas, much more known in Texas than elsewhere. The on-campus experience versus a commuter experience is quite a big decision point. If you go to a school that has a large presence of students that live on campus, you're going to get to know your fellow students a lot better, generally speaking, because you spend day and night together and hashing out great ideas, but a commuter school might offer you more of the amenities of a city or off-campus life. An undergrad focus versus graduate focus, some schools have many more grad students than they do undergrad, and so that definitely changes the flavor of the school. You might have professors who are involved in research and advising graduate students, but might not spend a lot of time in the classroom at a graduate program heavy school, whereas undergrad focus, it's quite the opposite. Sports teams, that whether you value that or not, will definitely make a difference. It does create an interesting culture to have nationally contending teams that you can go to their games and root them on and go to parties. So that's definitely something to consider. And then finally, whether you want more of a homogeneous or a diverse campus environment. And I think by this we're talking about a variety of things, but specifically talking about race and ethnicity or perhaps religious background. Some schools are kind of a melting pot of several different perspectives and racial backgrounds, such as University of Houston or UT Austin, for instance. whereas a school that is a historically black college or university is going to have a campus that is almost entirely, if not entirely, African American in their heritage. And so that might change the way that you interact on campus and what you get out of it. So many of the different things to think about. It's not necessarily the school that's closest to you or that you grew up rooting for in sports. Definitely should think about the full package here, and then financial aid and possibility for scholarships definitely weighs heavily as well. So I think I talked a little bit too long. Let's pass it off to the next person. I think it's Travis. Is that true?
Yeah, let me, as we wrap this section about taking your school, the only thing I wanted to add to this is what I would recommend personally is that figure out which dimensions mean the most to you. Find out, rank them in that order, discuss that decision with your family because they may have a different perspective with you, and then find a school that fits those needs. And then one thing that we specifically left off of this, not because it's not an important consideration, but in this decision process could come afterwards, is financial aid and cost and consideration. I'd hate for people to eliminate a school with the assumption that they can't get in or they can't afford it before they've figured out if that's the perfect school for them. So I always encourage students to take a step back, find a school that fits the needs of what you're looking for, and then let's figure out how to get you into that school, and we can talk about the other subjects and how those are affected there. But I find too often that students weigh cost into this equation, or they assume that close means cheaper because I can live at home, which may be the case, but if you can try to separate those dimensions, I think it'll serve you better. All right, so I'll push to the next screen, and who was this? Was this me or Travis? Travis, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. First off, I'll just throw this disclaimer out there. I've done college admissions before. It's been a little while, so I'm a little rusty, but a lot of these things I'm going to talk about typically don't change. Same thing for financial aid. I've done both, and a lot of the things are the same. But what I want to talk about today is talking about a little bit of the application requirements, a little bit about essays. Asim's going to go into much greater detail about the actual college essay. I have some real-world experience when it comes to, I used to read them a lot, and so, we've run into some very interesting things along the way. So I'm going to try to keep my information short and concise, but I have a habit of going on too long, and Asim can stop me, and I won't be offended. So the first thing I want to talk about is the application process. Right now, hopefully, you've already started the process. Kind of looking at, now's the season of college fairs, so hopefully you've been to a few at your school. There is a lot of them out there right now. It's now in the fall, and then some in the spring, but mainly in the fall is the time to start looking at that. You have a lot of different options when it comes to filling out college admission applications. Some schools require a very specific application that they don't do the common application, or if you're looking at maybe the junior college route, the Apply Texas application. So you're just going to have to decide and think, and I'm going to go into this more on my next slide, talking about the actual reality of things, of what schools you want to apply for. You want to kind of narrow them down. Because, a lot of times, applying to colleges can be a little bit time-consuming. It's something you definitely want to invest in, but you also want to, you don't want to spin your wheels, so to speak. You want to make sure that you're, you're working efficiently. So one thing you're going to want to look at when applying to different colleges, a lot of them have different application deadlines. So a lot of, enrollments, applications are open now. So this is a great time to get started and hopefully maybe get accepted. I know I got accepted very on to Schreiner very early in my senior year, and it was just a great thing. It was a weight off my shoulders. I didn't have to worry about stressing out the rest of the year. I had, I sent in my commitment fee and I was good to go. Some of you may not have that luxury. It just depends. I started early. I started looking my junior year, and hopefully you did the same. Getting into the application requirements, they're going to require demographic information, some short essays, personal statements, optional essays. It just depends. You're just going to want to look at the application and look exactly what they require. You want to follow the instructions. You want to make sure that if you have to handwrite it, that your penmanship is legible. because they really do look at those things more in depth than you would think. Not necessarily judging you on your handwriting, but did you follow the instructions? That type of thing. Some require several letters of recommendation. You want to make sure that you follow the instructions on that. A lot of them, they don't want you to turn in the letter of recommendation. They want it straight from whoever you've chosen to send the letter of recommendation in a sealed envelope directly to them. So you may never read those letters, but you want to make sure that you have someone on standby ready to give that letter. You want to look at someone. You want to cover all your bases. You want to maybe have a coach if you're not into athletics. If you're not, maybe a choir director, band director, club sponsor, something like that, where they really know you. They could judge your character. You don't just want to hand it to a random teacher and say, "Hey, you may not know me, but can you write this letter of recommendation for me?" You want to make sure that they actually know you. Your pastor, if you're involved in church activities, something like that. You want to kind of think about who you want to ask to write a letter of recommendation. So make sure you send in the exact amount. Some require 3, 2. You just want to make sure that you follow all your instructions. Financial aid application. I'm going to go into a little more detail on the next couple slides about financial aid process. Now is the time to get ready to start to think about financial aid. You really won't get started to that process until January, and I'll get into more on that in the next couple slides. Specific application segments, like I mentioned before, the Texas Common Application. Some schools are on that, like your public schools. Some of your private schools may not, or smaller schools. So you want to look to see if they're on that common application. If not, you want to go directly to their web application. I know back when I was starting college, it was an actual handwritten application. It wasn't online yet. So I don't know if there are too many of those applications still out there. Different private schools have different specifics. There was a screenshot of the Rice application. In true form, I chose Rice to talk about because of Asim. He loves Rice, and he loves to talk about it. So there was a screenshot there. I don't know what happened to that. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Sorry, the slide transitions are a little slow here.
Oh, okay. It should be the next one.
So this next one talks about financial aid. I mentioned this briefly before. I'm not going to go into a lot of the specifics, but this process, you're going to want to start filling out the FAFSA, the free application for student aid. This won't be available until January 1st, and you're not going to be able to fill it out until actually you and/or your parents have completed their tax information, or submitted their tax return for the year. So it may be February, March before you actually start the process. But you're going to have to complete a FAFSA every year. Both the student and your parent's information are going to be required. They have a great tool. The data retrieval tool will actually upload your taxes electronically, so you don't actually have to sit there with your taxes and try to figure out what line and what amount to put on each line. The FAFSA, I'm going to back up a second. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Student Aid. Make sure when you go online, you go to FAFSA.gov. Do not choose FAFSA.com. They'll actually charge you $85, and the information that may not even get back to you or may be correct. So FAFSA.gov, make sure that you fill out that on that website. What it does, it doesn't actually award you financial aid. Basically what it does, it determines your financial need, and it generates what's called your EFC, your Estimated Family Contribution. And so what that is, that's just a number. And basically, the lower your number is, the better. Basically, the best number to get is 0. And that means you're going to be able to get the maximum amount in the federal Pell Grant, which is grants or gifts, so you don't have to actually pay those back. And it also determines your eligibility for federal loans and other federal grants. One thing, I had a good question here about when's a good place to look at for grants. You're going to want to look at the federal websites. FAFSA has some links on their webpage for federal grants, and in the Texas grants, you're going to look at that as well. And grants or scholarships, right, Asim, they're funds that you don't have to pay back. That's called gift aid. You don't have to worry about that. So that's either different scholarships throughout your churches or things like that. And grants like the the Pell Grant is a grant that you can receive if you qualify financially, and that's why it requires the tax information. Loans are not considered gift aid. So you've got federal student loans and there's a parent loan. And I'm not going to go into too great a detail about the loans, and we can also do a follow-up call if needed, but there's a lot of good information about federal student loans. When I was a financial aid officer, I had a lot of students that are afraid of the federal loans. You want to look at college as an investment in yourself. So you want to try to make sure that you have all the resources and all the tools available to help you get that return from your investment. So if it means you have to take out a small student loan, it's not the end of the world. I mean, the interest rates are low. You don't have to make payments while you're in school, and they're at fixed interest rates. So it's not something to be afraid of. And a lot of times they're pretty much inevitable, but you want to be smart about your borrowing. Don't just take out the loans even if you don't need them. That's not smart. I had a lot of students try to do that, and I would counsel them and say, hey, look, I have 2 degrees and I financed them both. This is what I owe. Do you really want to try to do this? You want to be smart about it, okay? But they're there if you need them, and that's the point, okay? So there's also a Federal Plus loan. That's a parent loan. So your parents are going to have to apply for that based on their credit. Student loans, you don't need credit. You don't need a cosign either for your federal student loans. So the government has set a certain amount of money aside for you, either first year college, second year college, third and fourth year, that you can borrow and use for your tuition. And a lot of times you may need more. Let's say you're on need to have a housing plan, a meal plan, something like that. So you're going to need maybe a little extra money. So if your parent qualifies for the Federal Plus loan, you can cover up to the cost of tuition and maybe a little more if you need a computer or something like that with the Federal Plus loan. So they're good to have, but the federal government has made them harder to get over the last few years. So that is an option. And then, of course, scholarships. Now's a good time to start applying for scholarships. There's so many different scholarships out there. There's a great website I like to recommend. It's called fastweb.com. It has a lot of great scholarships. You just fill out a little matrix in it, and it kind of guides you to where you want to start to fill out scholarships. Just make sure that don't pay for a scholarship to apply for one. Don't ever put money down for a scholarship. Those are generally scams. All right, so I don't know if I have one more slide left. I think that might be all my information. I can't remember. The website, again, for the scholarships is called FastWeb, FastWeb.com, fastweb.com.
FastWeb. Do you want to write that into the chat?
Yes, I will go ahead and do that, yes.
Okay. Daren's got it. Great. So I believe, yes, I'll go into standardized tests. The one thing I wanted to say here is just reiterate, as you make a decision about which schools to apply to, definitely do not make any assumptions about what need you do or do not qualify for. Go through the FAFSA process, and that's the way you'll know.
That's right.
And then yeah, go ahead.
That's right. Even if you don't think you're going to qualify for any grants or scholarships or something like that, it doesn't hurt to fill it out because you never know. Don't let the cost, as Asim was saying, deter you from it. I mean, I went to a private college, and I didn't really think I could go, and we made it work, and it's something I really want to do. So you want to try to make sure it works. Don't let it scare you.
Yeah, and it's always easier to talk to financial aid officers at a school after you have an acceptance letter in hand. So
yeah, a lot of times they don't even start the financial aid process until you've been accepted. A lot of times.
Great. All right, so continuing on, so let's talk about standardized testing, and I'm going to be we're going to talk about SAT versus ACT, but let's start with the first thing. So you can't, there's this lovely myth that has been perpetuated since the days of our own youth, and I'm sure many days before, that you can't study for the SAT, and I don't know who mischievously started this rumor, but that's just flat out, unfortunately, not true. What is true is that people often ask, like, what does the SAT stand for? What does it test? Is it actually telling my intelligence or my likelihood to succeed in college? And it is unfortunately none of those things. It is a standardized test that is specifically in place because it's very difficult to compare somebody who went to school in a very small town in Wisconsin with somebody who went to a giant school in Houston without some way that says, okay, they've at least taken the same test, because all of the other just differences between the application could be due to the environment they grew up in and the opportunities that they had immediately available to them. With the increasingly availability of online presence and global nature of everything, that I think no longer something that you guys can rest on, that, oh, I was in a small town so I didn't have as many resources, because everything's out there available to you guys. But at the same time, colleges do need something to compare you to. Now, how much that's weighted largely depends on the type of school that you're applying to. As you can imagine, if a school has an incoming freshman class of 10 to 15,000, which I believe is typical for UT, they can't afford to pay nearly as much weight to every subjective part of the application, nearly as much as they can to the objective portions, things like test scores and AP exams and class rank. So those schools, out of necessity, might have a tendency to use an exam much more as a kind of a threshold, whereas schools that are much smaller that have the ability to go through every application more thoroughly may put a little less weight on it. But as I said before earlier when we started, always do the best you can. Any deficit that you have, you need to think about how you can make up for it. And the deficit should never be out of either laziness or just thinking that something doesn't have value. So a little bit about the SAT versus ACT, and honestly, this information is anything you can Google, so it's not a ton of things that I can provide you more information on. But so I'm going to let you Google like what subjects are covered and how they're scored and the exact number of questions and the logistics of each one. But I find that people always ask that, like, I heard one was easier than the other, or I didn't do so great on the SAT, so I'm going to jump to the ACT and take that. And again, what I'm trying to address here is the rumor mill of I should take one or the other, or guess, or just try to game it. And the reality is, if you're not preparing for either test, you're just taking a shot in the dark. And if you take the SAT once and you randomly take it again without preparing for it, you may do marginally better, you may do marginally worse. You are unlikely, barring any major problem that you had during the exam, to do significantly different unless you fell asleep or there was a big distraction or something. And that goes for whether you're taking the SAT or the ACT. So typically, standardized tests, if they're a good measure of being standardized, you should fall in the same percentile. And I find students are often trying to game the system without doing any work by jumping from one test to another, and that's not something that I advise, because frankly, you're not doing the work to change your score. You would be much better off, instead of trying to figure out a way of gaming the system, to focusing and studying to take the test. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the timeline. So when to take the test. Unfortunately, at this point, my recommendation is that you should take the first test before the end of your junior year, or at least the junior summer, which you guys have all passed now, largely because people think of the SAT for some reason as a senior test. It has nothing to do with whether or not you graduate high school, but people associate it with it's the last thing right before I apply to colleges. But the reality is you can take it whenever you feel prepared, and I recommend taking it at least by the end of your junior year, because you don't want to be in a situation your fall freshman year where you've just now taken it, and if some of you have not taken it yet, I strongly recommend taking it as soon as possible. Because the thing is, you may not know whether you have a good day or a bad day, or if you feel like I can do better if I put more preparation effort in which case, the earlier you take it, the earlier you have that information. In theory, you can garner that same information by taking a practice test, but for many people, performing on a practice versus a real test is very different. So I always like to recommend people have an actual test on file before their senior year begins, so they know if they need to dedicate specific time to that exam and concentrating on it versus classes that fall. That being said, so retaking the exam, as I alluded to earlier, I only recommend this here if you can actually imagine yourself changing what you did before, meaning you're changing your study habits, you're finding more time out for it, but just taking it repeatedly will not statistically give you a much better chance of of improving, and unless you are literally trying to get a minimum score for being eligible for athletics, for example, it is not a good strategy to employ because you're wasting your time and money and effort, more importantly, that could easily be spent on just actually preparing for the exam instead of taking random shots at it. In terms of resources, there's a number of free practice tests, free test prep, math tests that you can go through. There's unlimited resources. If you just throw a dart at Google, you'll find stuff that you can use to help prepare for it, and books are readily available at most schools, if not the library in your local city. But again, most of this stuff is available online, and I highly recommend if you have any questions about the SAT or SAT2s, we can talk about that here, but just put them into the question bank, but we'll keep going for now, as this was, I think, a good general introduction to it. All right, so letters of recommendation, I think Daren will talk a bit about.
Okay. Thanks, Asim. So, all right, so with letters of recommendation, there's always kind of a lot of myths and weird questions that come around these as well, and I've written a number of these for college students and fellow faculty members and for scholarships and even sororities. And so I've got a lot of experience being asked to write these letters, and so a lot of this comes from my own frustrations, frankly, of the lack of time I get and so on. But when you're thinking about who to ask for a letter of recommendation, my advice is always to think about putting together a collection of individuals who can speak to the many facets of you. So a lot of these colleges are really looking for well-rounded, high performers who aren't just good at math, but also have a social life, who contribute to the community through volunteer efforts, who are interested and have hobbies and can speak languages or whatever it might be. So you want to pick people who can speak to all these things if possible. You definitely need someone who can speak to your academic performance in school, and so a teacher or a principal might be the best person for that. And if you have 3 letters you've got to provide, then maybe 2 of those should be teachers who really know your work well. But the third one can be a bit of a wild card, so long as they know you well. Then they can speak to your character, your work ethic, your academic prowess, your interests, your service to the community, whoever it might be. So these can be pastors, these can be supervisors at a job that you work part-time, these can be advisors for clubs, these can be coaches on sports teams, you name it. They shouldn't be family members or anyone that has a conflict of interest. This should be someone who can be impartial about judging your work and speaking frankly about your abilities. If you're trying to figure out, well, who do I ask? Do I ask the principal or the superintendent if I happen to know him or her? And it's a big, impressive-sounding name, or my parents, they're friends with the CEO at their company. Should they write a letter? Well, the answer is probably not if they don't know you very well. Much better to get your sophomore year math teacher, if you really performed well in that class, to write you a letter than someone who just arbitrarily has a large title. Ideally, you can get a bit of both. And if you know someone who is kind of got the big title and is a leader in their field in some way, who also knows you well, that's ideal. But don't just cherry pick the people who sound the most impressive on paper. You definitely want to put people in there who can speak really intimately to how hard you work and who you really are. But try to think about assembling kind of a cast of characters, assemble a team of people who can write letters for you. And they don't have to be the same 3 people. If you have 3 letters that are due to this school and 3 letters that are due to that school, you don't have to have the same 3 people write for you. So you can have, teacher A, teacher B, and coach C write for one school, and teacher A, another different teacher, teacher D, and your pastor write for another school. It all depends. So when you ask, you need to give them as much time as possible. This is a courtesy. You're acting in a professional manner and need to extend these people the courtesy of their time, give them time to prepare a letter. So we're talking definitely not less than a week. Ideally, give them a 2 to 3 week notice is plenty, generally speaking, unless you know they're going to be traveling, and maybe up to a month. When you go beyond a month, it starts getting to the point where you're going to want to follow up and remind them closer to the time. So really looking for that 3 week sweet spot is about right. You need to formally ask them, and you want to frame it in a way that gives them the chance to be honest with you up front. So if you just say, hey, teacher, can you write me a letter for this college application? He or she might say, well, sure, I can write you a letter, but it might not be the glowing positive recommendation that you're expecting. And you don't want them to write a lukewarm letter because admissions counselors can read between the lines on this and know that, oh, well, he's really a lazy student then, based on how they phrase the letters. So the best way to do this, I think, is approach the teacher or approach the letter writer and say, I'm thinking about applying to this school. Here's why I'd like to apply to the school. I think you'd be a great person to recommend me because X, Y, Z. Would you feel comfortable writing a positive letter of recommendation for my college application? So if you frame it that way, you give them the chance to say yes or no. And if they do say yes, I'm willing to write a positive letter, then you can be pretty assured that they will. Not that you're trying to trap them into saying that they'll do a positive letter, but generally speaking, they'll say no if you phrase it that way, if they don't feel comfortable writing a positive letter. Put it in writing too. A good email would be nice, or a face-to-face call or both would be nice. The next thing is be really organized. So your teachers are really busy and they've got a lot on their plate, and it's really respectful of their time if you provide them all the information they need up front, way in advance. So if they have some special code that they need to log into the website to upload their letter, you need to make sure they have that code. If they need to send an envelope in to the school and you need them to sign the back of it to show that it's secure and so on, go ahead and give them a stamped envelope so they don't have to guess about where that address is, and so on and so forth. So give them all the resources they need. You might even provide a list of bullet points to remind them of your accomplishments or give them a resume. Let them see other materials that you're applying with. That'll help them write a much more robust letter than Johnny was in my class and got an A. They'll be able to write a little bit more that speaks to some of the strengths that you want. And then, it's actually, if you're asking for multiple letters from a single letter writer, it might even make sense to just give them an Excel spreadsheet that has, a column for where the letter needs to go, another column for when it's due, and so on, and just make sure they can tick those off at one at a time. I've always found that to be a very nice thing when students gave me that. And then finally, know the rules. If they're asking, if a school says do not send more than 3 letters, then don't. But if they say something like at least 3 letters are required, then you can send up to 4. I wouldn't send 5 or 6 necessarily, but if you think 4 people can together, write a better letter, then go ahead and send it 4. And then it's good to follow up. Make sure that your letter was received by the university. You can email the admissions office and say, hi, I'm just calling to follow up to make sure you've received my application materials in good order. And that'll give them a chance to check their records. Also kind of implicitly puts your name on their radar once again. A lot of these schools use online systems, though, so you're actually able to track the progress of your letters being uploaded by your recommenders as you go. And also follow through and thank your letter writers. If you do end up getting into a school, contact him or her and say, thanks so much for that letter. I got in. I got a scholarship. I'm going next year. Appreciate all your help. And stay in touch with them as you go off to college. Looks like we have a question on the board. Let's see. It's, if a teacher writes a letter and leaves it with you, what is the best way to handle it? If they write a letter and leave it with you, I would make sure to tell them, most schools are going to want, not anonymous, they're going to want confidential letters. And so by that, they mean that they want the teacher to write a letter in a way that they don't think you're going to look at it. So ask the teacher to provide it to you in a sealed envelope and go ahead and have them sign their name across the back flap of the envelope so that they can tell if the seal's been broken. That's always safe, better safe than sorry, and then you can include that envelope in the larger application envelope that you send into school. I find that's always best. There's no doubt, no tampering questions or anything like that. I think it's also nice that you can trust your letter writers to write a letter confidentially that speaks to your strengths without them knowing you're going to be looking at it. So if you can't trust them to write that letter, you probably shouldn't be asking. So I hope that answers your question. We can probably move on to the next one, Asim.
Great. And Daren, what do you think about, is it proper to ask the potential recommender if they're familiar with writing a letter and like the type of format? And because I always worry that depending on how experienced the professor or teacher is, they may think something's glowing, which just sounds like, it sounds very factual based as opposed to a more intimate letter. How do you address that or recommend?
Yeah, good point. So yeah, you don't want to. I guess you don't want to presume that they know how to write these letters, but also don't treat them like idiots. I mean, it's not the first time around the block for teachers. They know how to write letters and how to embellish the wording as appropriate. But you can definitely offer some suggestions. So the way I've written in the past to people who have recommended me for jobs and graduate programs and so on has been, hey, thanks for writing the letter. Just so you know, my resume is attached so you can see what I've done, and I'm really emphasizing the following qualities and experiences that I have, X, Y, Z. So if you could touch on those in your letter as well, that would just make my case even stronger. Thanks so much. That's one way to do it. If you end up asking, your manager at your part-time job, or maybe a coach or a pastor or someone who's not as familiar with writing these types of letters, I think it's a little bit more appropriate to ask them up front and say, are you familiar with the format? I'm happy to provide examples. If not, and that might be an opportunity for you to then find some good ones on the internet and send it to them. But you don't want to get to the point where you're writing your own letter and having them sign it. It's not ethical, and I don't think it does you any favors either. Okay. Writing a great college essay. Is this yours, Asim? Or is this Travis? Did we lose Asim? Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I was talking there for a little while. I apologize. I was on mute. Okay.
Looks like
I was like, what? I thought you were, ignoring me. No, sorry. I keep putting on mute, and whoever's got honking in the background, also try to put it on mute, please. So let's talk about college essays, and I think this will wrap up kind of the theme of today. And this is, let me talk about this holistically, and then we can talk about some of the principles that I have here on the page. So you can take a look at the prompts, and I highly recommend doing this before you even start anything, because you don't want to write a ton of details about something that it turns out that's not even available to you as a topic to write on. But typically, they give you a couple of choices, and these choices, to me, fall under two really different types of ways of presenting yourself. One is based on things that you have actually done or your experiences and how they exemplify the student you are and who you're trying to be. And the other ones allow you an opportunity, either by describing a principle or even a fictional character or something else that you admire, maybe a cause that you support, that give you an opportunity to describe those things, but really what they're doing is getting you to write about and demonstrate your values and what your ambitions are and what you hold dear that will hopefully be representative of what inspires you to do whatever you do at that institute of higher education. So those are good things to know and try to separate those, because one thing I find it's a lot easier for me to talk about and to advise people about how to do the experiential one as opposed to the ambitious one, because the ambitious one has to be so delicately done, because it's interesting, you're writing a story or an essay not about yourself to make a case for you to get into a school. And so it should obviously demonstrate your ability to excel in communications in the written form, but at the same time, it needs to reflect on you, which is what needs to be instrumental or an intricate part of what you're conveying here. But the overall principle for the experience that I always recommend is show, don't tell. And what I mean by that is there's been countless times where I've read at least a first draft of almost every student's essays ever submitted to me, where it becomes a list of things that they believe that they are, which is like, I am hardworking, I am caring, I am generous with my time, with my community, all those things. And as you can imagine, those are very commonplace and very easy to say, and so much so that almost anybody can say it, and it's often what people feel like a college essay should say, so it's often what we read. But the reality is, as somebody who's reading that type of essay, it doesn't tell me anything about you. What I'd much rather see is descriptions of experiences that you've had that demonstrate those characteristics that you're trying to tell me you have. So if you tell me you're incredibly hardworking, describe the situations that would say that you're more hardworking than your fellow students. So you've had to manage multiple responsibilities, both towards academics as well as family things and community activities. That, describing those in detail, always painting a vivid image, is much more profound than saying, quote, I am hardworking, which, again, doesn't carry much weight unless I know you personally already, in which case this isn't, a fair reading of your work. So that's what I mean by show, don't tell. Don't ever leave if you find yourself describing a list of characteristics you have, you're doing yourself a disservice. Think about the experiences that wrap up those types of things that you're trying to exemplify, and tell me that story, and I'll draw from it myself that you're hardworking. And the ambitious ones, like I said, about another character, I actually wrote mine about a fictional character. And so, I didn't think about this at the time, but inadvertently what I was doing was describing all the values that I hold dear and what I admire about that character. And so it did reflect on my inner workings. I think it's just more difficult to pull off because, again, in many ways you're describing values as opposed to things that you've done specifically to exemplify or aspire to those values. So it does not say that it can't be done. It's just, in my eyes, more difficult. So writing style, eloquence, in written communication, all those things are going to matter a lot more in that one. The last, at the bottom there, I'll say a huge thing, and people don't take advantage of this enough, is to get feedback. And this may not just be from your senior English teacher, but this could be anybody who's willing to read it for you and tell you, like, hey, does this tell you who I am? Does this provide a compelling narrative of me as a whole? And you know me, and they can tell you. I think people that know you best are a great place to start. And then once you've had it a little bit refined and you said, okay, I was way off on my messaging, now I've cleaned that up, let's have an English teacher help work with me on the language and seeing if I'm putting my best work forward. And the last thing I'll say that's not on the slide here is the whole purpose of the essay is to describe the narrative of you. So whatever you do, think about how does despite what you may think, like the choices you make are active choices and trade-offs that you are selecting. So if you said, like, this year I'm going to take AP History instead of taking an off block, that was an active choice. Or this year I'm going to get a job and work part-time so I have some extra spending money because I want to learn how to do a skill as well as understand how to manage my money better. Those are active things. And you might overlook those types of things as part of your everyday life that everybody else does as well. But if you've made those active decisions, I think of everybody, and I always ask students, like, how do all of the decisions that you've made in the last 3.5 years represent your high school career? And that's really the way I challenge students to think of it, is how would you describe and what is the narrative of your career? And this is just one example, is that, like, I aspire to understand different groups of people. So I've spent a lot of time in my athletics program as well as my community and my church, and then also in academics as a UIL decathlete or so forth. And that is because I appreciate diversity and the different experiences that those programs bring to me. And so I want to make a narrative about that as a value that I have, and those excelling in each of those types of programs exemplifies that. So everything as you're writing should be talking about how you are describing the narrative of your high school career. Okay, I think we're very close on time, so I'll give everybody an opportunity here to just write out some questions, and we'll take some live, and then I'm hoping that the phone call can continue if I need to close the laptop, which I actually may have to soon. But if anybody would like to write in questions that we can help answer, specific things that you need more clarification on or things we may not have addressed, this is, I guess, free form into the chat box. Yep. And Travis will put it in that. I'll send out, by the way, I'll also send out a video recording of this entire presentation that you're welcome to review, and then also hopefully with some contact information where you guys can reach out to us as well individually if you have any questions that we could be resourceful for. Do you guys have any experience in the military academy? That's a great question. We have people on staff. Daren or Travis, do you want to try to speak to this? I know of us three personally, we've not had experiences in attending, but by proxy. Daren?
For the military academies, is that what you said?
Yeah. Any thoughts about or insight on the military academies, or should we? I
don't, and I think you're going to probably want to reach out to someone who has a little bit closer connection to this. There's probably an ROTC advisor or a military recruiter in your area who could probably answer more questions, or you could probably find someone online who can give you that idea. It's a very different process. My understanding of it is that each branch of the academies has a limited number of people that they can receive, and you have to be recommended by, I believe, senators or U.S. representatives or something. So getting in front of those people to get them to endorse you on your application is kind of a heavy task. But it can be done, and people who don't have, these tight connections with politicians go all the time to the academies. So I would recommend probably getting in touch with someone who's a little bit more of an expert on that.
Yeah, I agree. I have some limited experience. I worked with the preparatory program at Shriner University. It's called Greystone, and it's actually for students who applied the first round and did not get accepted. So, and they have a very high acceptance rate now. It's called Greystone at Shriner University, and it's a really great program. But they have a lot of connections as well. You boost up your academics, your physical fitness, and anything that you were lacking. And it's a great program. But that's the limited experience that I have with military academies.
I would just second what these guys are both saying, which is also like reach out. I think in this day and age, if nothing else, with Facebook and other online profiles, you can find people that have either been to that school as an alumni or current students of that school, or this is pretty easy for almost every institution, is contact the admissions office. Don't hesitate to get on the phone, call somebody, and ask them every question you have. That's what they're there for, and that's the best way to start you off as you're trying to find more information.
Yeah. Looks like we have another question here in the chat about if I'm accepted into the university, does it also imply that I've been accepted within a specific college of choice in that university? So, for instance, if you're applying to, University of North Texas and you want to get into their music program, if you get into UNT, does that also mean you're in music? I'm not sure. Every college plays it a little bit different, I believe. Some schools send one letter that says, congratulations, you're in, and then maybe a couple weeks later, the specific college or unit will send you an admissions letter. Sometimes it's just the unit will say you're accepted. I think at University of Southern California, it's by school. So the School of Engineering and Annenberg School and so on admit people. Otherwise, there's a separate university college for just people who are coming in undeclared. And they have different levels of acceptance rate, I believe. But every school is different. That's something you can ask the admissions person for sure.
Hey everyone. So and just FYI, if the screen may have cut, hopefully the session continues. I'm on the phone, but the battery just died on my computer, and so I am unable to continue hosting it virtually, but if the phone session is still continuing, we can keep talking here. I didn't get a chance to see the last question or two that was up there before the screen went down. Does anybody know what the question said?
Yeah, it was about housing. He said, once in, how should I know about my making housing arrangements? And I was already responding to that question. You'll also, once you pay your commitment fee and things like that, you'll start the housing application process. Sometimes you'll actually have to apply to be in certain residence halls. Other times it's just, you'll have a greater choice. It just depends on the school. You'll most likely get information from the housing, the housing office letting you know of the process and if you need to make any deposits or things like that. There's another question to see. It says, does a college visit give you an advantage on being accepted? I wouldn't say that it would, make or break you, but it's obvious you want to let the college know that you're interested in that school and that you're really interested. You want to check out the campus. it definitely could not hurt, and it'll give you more information about the school and make sure that that's your right choice.
Yeah, and I 100% second that. That's exactly what I was going to respond with. Is it bigger than whether or not it can help you get in, which I don't think it can really be that helpful. Is it will tell you a lot about if that school feels right for you. I advise people strongly because I was set to go to a different school completely, and I went and visited that campus, and it just felt all wrong. And I was dead set against going to my undergrad at Rice. I went and visited the college, and it changed my mind completely. So I can tell you from first-hand experience that it's incredibly helpful to go see that school because it could definitely affect your decision. In terms of giving you a favorable view, though, as Travis said, what's more important, what could give you a favorable view, is if you express to them that that's your top choice. And I highly recommend doing that if that's true. You should definitely not be saying that to multiple schools and conveying that because that could work out poorly for you in the end. But it's not so much that going to the school to visit is helpful, but rather you conveying to them that this is my top choice, I really want to go here. And that, you never know, could be the thing that pushes them over the edge. That actually very much changed my life completely when I sent a letter and email when I was on wait list. This was for graduate school, but a week before classes started, I sent an email to the admissions council and said, if you're still considering students off the wait list, I'm definitely still interested. And 5 minutes later, I got a call that said we were going to close up the class we had currently, but we just had somebody drop out, and since you emailed, you're in. And that took me to Duke University for medical school. So I highly recommend letting somebody know when you're interested in going there. But don't be bothersome, but definitely there's nothing wrong, and I think administrators love seeing that somebody can use their school very highly.
Asim, it looks like we have another question, and I'll read it to you. It has to do with SATs and ACTs, so I'll let you take that. It says, Daren already got it. I'm sorry. Talking about the receiving the ACT or SAT scores by the application deadline. So Daren grabbed that one, so that's good.
Okay, great. You guys can hopefully all read that there. I often hear a question regarding whether or not I should, cancel my scores or see my scores, and or do people take composites, or is it just the highest one total? Just know that and I doubt this has changed, but when the College Board sends your SAT scores to a college, you select if you want to send them directly or if you want to get them yourself and send them. But when they send them, they send a record of the entire history. So they may tell you we take a composite or we take the best one. But at the end of the day, they have all your exams. And one thing that I would say that doesn't look good is that you have 7, again, what I was alluding to earlier, you have 7 different tests with hardly any change between any of them. That says that that tells me easily that you're just retaking the test. So just know that no matter what, they see the report just like you see your history of SATs, not just the last one.
All right, Asim, it looks like that might have been our last question. Don't know if you want to go ahead and wrap things up or anything else you want to add.
That's great. If you guys, like I said, I'll put my information there as well, but I'm happy to offer it here. But it's m.aasim.saeed@gmail.com, and I know Travis and Daren already shared theirs. We'll send out a link to this video. It's a resource, and just most importantly, we just want to convey to you all that we are just part of being part of the Floyd State family and alumni now is that hopefully we have people that have gone through the steps that you are hoping to follow the footsteps in. We have an incredible wealth of resources from staff here as well as other alumni. Part of doing that, the last pages that unfortunately I can't show now are just joining the Facebook group, which I know many of you guys don't really use Facebook that much anymore, but one of the many benefits of putting the Facebook group up there is specifically because we want you guys to find each other when you go off to school. You're going to see these t-shirts around campus, and you may or may not have been friends while you were in the program or met each other in the program, but you'll find that commonality and that brotherhood as you go on with the teacher, but then also beyond that, as you get into your careers, looking for jobs, maybe moving into community, all of that community church. So you'll be seeing these faces again, and we just want you guys to be, all of the available resources that we can offer be available to you, and that the sense of community continues beyond the program we have. So that's all I have. If you guys have any closing statements, you're welcome to do that. If not, we'll wrap up.
Yeah, there was one question before the screen went blank about Boy State counselor applications. Just send that to any one of us. We'll be more than happy to answer that question or point you in the right direction.
Yeah, actually, when I send it,
I'm sorry?
When I send out the video link, I'll make sure that I apologize, that was also on the last page of the presentation, but I'll send that out with the email that comes probably from Craig as a follow-up that has a link to the video recording of this session, as well as another link to the Boy State Counselor application.
Excellent. Okay, well, I guess that does it for me as well. Yeah, we have a wealth of information and knowledge just with us three, but know that we have a wide network of alumni. Those of us who've been with the program for, I'm going on year 16. We have a great wealth of knowledge. So just reach out to us, even though it might be a crazy question in your head. We'll be happy to answer it.
Thank you guys for attending, and best of luck. And hopefully we hear great news about all the wonderful places that you guys will be sharing.
Thank you, Mom.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to shut off now, and assuming it'll extend in the class.
Thanks, everyone.